You can only create amazing artwork with really expensive art supplies. Whoops, nearly fell there. Hello everyone! I've heard this absolutely everywhere, and I was even told it myself when I was getting started. However, let's find out if that's actually true. Today, I'm going to be testing both the Caran Luminance, basically the most expensive colored pencils out there, against the cheap old Crayolas, testing them to their limits to see what really are their strengths and their weaknesses. To begin this, I'm going to swatch out these colors. Now, to make this as close a comparison as I can, I picked out the closest colors. A white, a black, two reds, one lighter and one darker, an orange, yellow, green, blue, and a purple. Now to see exactly where the strengths and weaknesses were in these pencils, I decided to try them out on 3 different papers, all with different tones. I used a regular white paper from a regular old sketchbook, a brown toned paper, and then also a black toned paper to really test out the translucency of these colors. On the white paper, these colors actually looked surprisingly similar between the two brands, but as I went on to the brown and the black toned papers, that's when the translucency really stood out. You could definitely see a lot of the color of the paper showing through these pigments and altering how they actually appeared. Whereas on the white paper, these colors looked practically identical. I am not done testing these out yet, so I set up an entire list of things to test these colored pencils on. First of all was opacity, which I feel like after swatching these, I already have a good feeling of how they'd work. However, I really wanted to push them, layer them up, and see if they performed better when there was far more pigment on paper. Now, if you aren't aware of what layering is, I did make a quick YouTube short that goes over all of that, so if you want, you can check that out at the end of this video. You'll notice with the first example with the Crayolas on the left-hand side, I used a lot more pigment. And then on the right-hand side, I used a very light hand. I was not burnishing, I was merely layering. So after nearly 10 layers with the Crayolas, I did finally get a little bit better opacity. However, on the right-hand side, you'll see the test where I used the Caran Luminance pencils. Again, I used a very light hand, only layering to see how opaque I could get these colors. I quickly realized that the Caran won in this department by far. Where I had to use 10 plus layers to get the opacity where I wanted it with the Crayolas, I only had to do 4 or 5 with the Caran. Not to mention, it just looked so much more rich and vibrant after those 4 or 5 layers. How they would work together when you put 2 complementary colors together, because as artists, we don't want to use just our limited colors we have. We like to mix and blend and create loads of new colors. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to use 2 colors that fall next to each other on the color wheel. If you'd like to know more about color theory and how all that works, then feel free to check out this video, which I will have up above and also down in the video description. I put down a base of yellow first, since it's so much easier to start with your lighter colors and then work up to your darker colors, rather than starting with your darker colors and then trying to figure out how to lighten them up. So then after this base layer of yellow was established, I then went on top of it again with an orange. Then I went on top of that with the red, doing basically the same thing, however stopping about 1/3 of the way instead. Just enough so that each of the colors overlapped each other a little bit. I was actually fairly surprised with how well this worked out for these pencils, especially for the Crayolas. The Caran were so much more buttery and silky and just completely fused together so much better than the Crayolas. But I do feel like this is one of the few strengths that the Crayolas have. After that, I went on to see how well they would blend when they are put side by side with colors that technically don't go well with each other. These are colors that usually are used to make colors seem more dull or to darken the color, for example, red and green. I basically started the same way I did with the complementary colors, where I basically added a layer of green and then a layer of red on top, lightening up my pressure as I got closer to the left-hand side, stopping about 2/3 of the way. Now this is where I definitely saw a massive difference between the 2 brands. With the Crayolas, they stuck pretty badly. You didn't see that beautiful fusion of colors when the 2 colors crossed paths. Instead, you just kind of saw this harsh wall between them. Yes, it got a little bit better as you added more layers of color and pigment, but overall the Caran did so much better. After seeing how more layers added with the cheaper pencils made them perform better, I wanted to see what burnishing would do with these pencils. In theory, they should do really well. Now, if you aren't aware of what burnishing is, it basically is when you use medium to heavy pressure to push your colors into each other. This often will give you more vibrancy, more saturation, and altogether just so much more vibrant colors. For this, I used a blue and a purple, and if you remember earlier, I said I picked out the closest colors I could find to each other, and these two looked almost identical on the outside. However, when on the paper, instead of a blue, the Crayola looked a whole lot more like a teal. And instead of a purple, the Crayola looked more like a light to a medium blue. This was very disappointing for these colored pencils, whereas the Caran the color on the outside is practically identical to the actual pigment. Now, ultimately, they did work to burnish together. However, because they didn't have all that much pigment in them to begin with, what ended up happening is I flattened the texture of the paper accidentally. That meant that when I went on top of it with a second layer to add a transitioning color, it didn't stick hardly at all. If anything, it kind of started to scratch off that bottom layer and ended up with a very streaky appearance. Moving on, I tried solvent. Now, as you guys know, I am a massive fan of solvent. Solvent can make your artwork go from dull to absolutely stunning. So my thought process was that this could potentially be a massive shortcut for those who have to do all those extra layers because of the cheaper pencils. However, it doesn't, because what I found is when I added the solvent on top, there wasn't enough pigment there. So even though I did double as many layers as I did with the Caran it still wasn't enough, and I ended up with such a nasty color left behind. This was extremely disappointing because it meant that while it would save time, it wouldn't save that much time, and ultimately having to do double, triple, or even quadruple the amount of layers you put on your paper in order to use the solvent, it would just completely take away all that time you earned back. So again, I feel like the Caran won out on this one. Now, I also wanted to do some tests that were specific to how I like to draw. These are things that you may have never heard of before, but I highly recommend you try them. The first is adding light colors on top of dark colors. Usually I end up using the white to blend more than adding it on top as an opaque color. As you can see, in this case with the Crayolas, they just kind of scratched off that bottom layer more than adding a light color on top. So again, the Caran won for me. Moving on, I wanted to try something that again I use, but I haven't actually seen anybody else do in any art video ever before, and that is to add pastel ground on top of your drawings. Now, you guys may have seen a previous video I made where I used this to actually make my own pastel mat, but you can actually use it in smaller senses too, when you essentially lose the texture of the paper and your pencils no longer stick. All you need to do is add this to your damaged areas and then let it dry. Come on top of it, just as if you were starting again. It does mean that no matter what you do to damage your drawing, there is always a way to fix it. And then after that dried, I went on top of it with the white with both the Crayola and the luminance, and as you can see, after adding that, the white stuck so much better than it did the first time I applied it in that first example. So what are my final thoughts on the Crayolas versus the Caran luminance? Well, first of all, obviously the Caran luminance are going to be so much better, but maybe not for you. When you're first getting started and you don't know if you will really invest the amount of time into your drawings to make the Caran luminance worthwhile, then the Crayolas are still a really good starter set. Their colors are rich and vibrant. They just require a little bit more effort, more layers to get the same vibrancy and saturation as the Caran luminance. But you can get there, and like I said before, feel free to purchase the pastel ground. That will help you so much to really breach the gap between the two qualities, and on a budget. I definitely recommend getting the Caran when you can afford it. I want you to do it when you know they've already put in so much time into your drawings and will put in even more time into your drawings to make that money worthwhile, because you can achieve the same results with the Crayolas as you can the Caran. You just have to build up your own skill level to do so. And now if you'd like to see how you can use the Crayolas to compete with the Caran Luminance, then feel free to check out this video. I will literally be sharing with you all of the secrets to get absolutely stunning results from your Crayolas so that you can achieve the exact same results as myself and many other artists. I'll see you over there, and until next time, God bless.